Tonight on CBC Vancouver News. Working in this relentless heat.
A little hot, a little sweaty.
These crews out here working in the heat, they're doing their best they can.
Heat warnings continue. A BC-wide campfire ban is looming, and a shift in the weather could rapidly spark up wildfire activity. Plus, the province hails a new medical school
with a focus on that clinical experience out in community.
But critics claim the timeline is far too slow.
A complete lack of urgency.
Also, could Team Canada pull off an upset?
The #1 ranked team in the world against Canada, so it's going to be an uphill battle.
Soccer's David and Goliath matchup that'll pave the way to the Copa final.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Hello, I'm Tanya Fletcher. Thanks for joining us. This sweltering heat continues to blanket most of BC. And now, a new concern. A shift in the weather up north could cause the wildfire season to suddenly flare up. But first, we go to the southeastern corner of the province, where temperature records are shattering. Our Corey Bullock begins our team coverage from Cranbrook with a look at how those who work outdoors are coping.
Streets that are typically bustling with people are empty today, with many likely retreating to air-conditioned spaces as intense heat descends on the interior. But for construction workers like Sam Wallace, it's just another day at work.
A little hot, a little sweaty, but almost makes the days go by faster. So,
like many others, Wallace and his co-workers are starting their days a little earlier than usual, at the relatively cool time of 7 a.m., giving them relief during the hottest part of the day, the late afternoon. But the heat, he says, is something they're getting used to.
seems like more and more every summer, yeah. Getting hotter and hotter.
A heat warning has been issued for BC's southern interior. Environment Canada says the hot weather will stick around until the end of the week. And over in Boundary Country, the extreme heat is being felt by road crews.
For the crews, the important thing is making sure that they feel supported, that they can take breaks if they're starting to feel signs of any kind of heat stress, out of breath, lightheaded, that they sit in a vehicle with air conditioning. We supply lots of water, electrolytes, and starting early in the morning, starting at 5 a.m. before the sun comes up.
Environment Canada says the elevated temperatures do pose a moderate risk to public health. And WorkSafe BC says it's important for employers to brief their workers on the risks.
Heat stress can set in quite quickly. And so again, it's really important that all workers are engaged in those discussions before the heat of the day, which we see is going to be quite significant for the coming weeks.
She recommends doing what these crews have done and adjusting work hours.
Cooling areas with lots of shade, appropriate work-rest cycles.
And while the heat brings with it a challenge,
kind of brings everyone closer together because we're all in it together,
it's more bearable with friends. Corey Bullock, CBC News, Cranbrook.
On the heels of this hot, dry stretch, a sweeping campfire ban is about to take effect, covering all of BC as of noon Friday. This is the first time this season we're seeing an all-out campfire ban in the province. The rules came down quickly through the day, starting this morning with just the Kamloops region. By midday, though, the Southeast Fire Centre and most of the Coastal Fire Centre were included as well. And by this afternoon, that ban expanded province-wide to include the Cariboo, Northwest, and Prince George regions as well. With that, let's bring in our Darius Madavi. And Darius, so far it's been nothing but blue skies, sunshine, dry conditions. That's about to change, and that could mean bad news for the wildfire danger.
Yes, up north, we're going to see a cold front start to roll in, and that's bad news. Cold front might sound like good news because down in the south, we're staying hot and dry, and that's also bad news, but a cold front can bring some dangerous conditions for fires. And right now, we have essentially a tinderbox around the province that is ready to ignite with just a spark, really. And lightning is quite the spark indeed. So that's what we're going to be watching out for in the days ahead. You can see how much we've jumped in terms of that fire danger. Now, we still have these heat warnings in place in the southern half of the province. The ones here on the coast may start to drop into tomorrow, by overnight tonight into tomorrow. Up in the north, probably midweek, and in the southern interior, at least until the end of this week, but no definite end in sight. If we start to zoom in, you can see we also have some wildfires of note now. One just northeast of Terrace that you can see here. Wildfire of note because it's close to the highway. No evacuation order in place because of that. And another one that we have up here by the BC-Yukon border. So plenty of activity still happening, but those are relatively small fires, just significant because of their proximity to highways. Most of the activity is still happening up in the northeast, so that's the place we're going to be keeping an eye on, especially as we see that cold front roll through, because in the days ahead, that's what we're going to be focusing on. You can see some precipitation coming up to the northwest. That is good, but with it can also come some gusty conditions. As this ridge breaks down, if we see that cold front roll in, we get some drier conditions coming with that cold front, not to the northwest, but over to the northeast perhaps. We could see some dry lightning, bringing new fire starts, and some really strong winds that could then carry those fires to new areas. So the fires that we already have in place that may be currently under control can then spike in their activity. So there's going to be a lot happening up in the north, but also down here in the south where conditions are going to remain hot, and we may see a few storms as well as that ridge breaks down. So we'll get a closer look at this later this hour, Tanya.
All right, we'll talk to you again later in the show. Thanks, Darius.
Thank you.
Well, soaring temperatures can prove deadly for pets. So veterinarians in the province are urging pet owners to keep animals in cool places at all times during this heat wave and to look for these signs before it gets too hot.
And just excessive panting, excessive drooling, and showing some signs of weakness and incoordination. At that point, we're getting too far down and we need to really stop what we're doing.
A dip in the water is highly recommended, but if your pets don't have access to a beach, best to keep them indoors. You're also reminded never to leave an animal in a hot car. To the island now, where a blue-green algae bloom alert at Elk Lake and Beaver Lake has expanded now to include Thetis Lake as well. Now, the algae usually produces a visible blue-green sheen, which appears as surface scum on the water. The Capital Regional District warns that blue-green algae is known to produce cyanotoxins, and if ingested with the water, it could be harmful to humans and even lethal to pets. Visitors are urged to avoid contact with the algae and to keep animals on a leash so that they stay out of the lakes. Wearing sunscreen to protect your skin and prevent cancer may sound like common sense, but using sunscreen has become the latest target of some health influencers on social media like TikTok. They claim ingredients in sunscreen are harmful in large doses. So we went to a medical doctor for some advice.
Well, that's the key, right? In high concentrations, but the amount that's actually absorbed is minuscule and very, very small. The significance of that has not been determined. The significance of getting too much sun on your skin is definitely known, right?
Another claim made on social media is that you can craft your own diet to protect your skin from cancer, but he says there is no evidence of that. The Canadian Cancer Society warns more than 11,000 Canadians will be diagnosed with melanoma skin cancer this year alone. Let's shift gears to Merritt now, where residents are being told not to use water unless absolutely necessary. It's because a pump at the city's main distribution well failed overnight. Tom Popick is there finding out how locals are coping with the news mid-heat wave.
After 2 days of record heat and the temperatures once again edging towards 40, it's not the kind of day that you want a municipal waterworks to break down.
Hotter now than normal, but you know, we'll survive.
Aldo Del Vecchio is dropping by the municipal pool, the city now offering a free day to help residents cool off after it was forced to impose water restrictions.
Well, this morning it wasn't one dry, but it was significantly lower than it should have been. The 3 reservoirs were all significantly lower than they should have been.
Last night, a water gasket on the city's main well leaked, spraying water on an electrical panel and shutting it down. The worry is reduced pumping and capacity will slowly reduce reservoir levels and pressure.
What we need to make sure is that we have enough water in the reservoir so that our fire department has pressure to be able to fight a fire in the community if that should happen.
It could take 48 hours before repairs are completed. In the meantime, the city has requested residents to limit all unnecessary water use, like watering lawns or car washing. But for the moment, there is no bylaw enforcement or fines.
And it looks like people are being conscientious. They're taking this very seriously, so the water levels are going up a little quicker than we thought they were going to.
Drinking water isn't affected. Residents are being urged to stay hydrated and can still take showers and baths or hit that pool. Aldo has his own solution.
Well, I live in Lower Nicola. I got my own water out there.
The city is telling residents to expect an update on repairs by tomorrow and to also check social media and the municipal website for any updates. Tom Popick, CBC News, Merritt.
With the province struggling to keep up with the doctor shortage, an announcement from the Premier today fell upon desperate ears. The nuts and bolts of a new medical school at Simon Fraser University here in the Lower Mainland. But as Katie DeRosa explains, it'll be another 5 years yet before those grads can actually practice medicine.
Tiffany Dang hopes to be one of the first doctors to graduate from SFU's new medical school.
Future students of this school should be excited about the program's potential to revolutionize medical education in BC.
Dang, a fourth-year undergrad at SFU, stood next to Premier David Eby on Tuesday as the province announced new details on the medical school slated to open in Surrey in 2026. The province has earmarked more than $33 million for the school's interim space on SFU's Surrey campus, as well as lease space nearby. Another $27 million will go towards operating costs this year. It's the first medical school in Western Canada with a dedicated family doctor program. The need is urgent. The health crisis has left about 800,000 British Columbians without a family physician. It's also left hospitals scrambling with staffing shortages, which this weekend alone forced the closure of 4 ERs in Interior Health.
There is no question but that delivering that standard of care is more challenging in smaller northern and rural and remote communities. That's why today's announcement, a new medical school, training up family doctors here in Surrey, in the fastest growing community.
The head of BC's College of Family Physicians, Dr. Vincent Wong, said this new medical school is desperately needed, with doctors experiencing rising levels of burnout. But as the opposition points out, the first crop of doctors won't graduate until 2029.
Simply not good enough. I don't think anyone can describe that as anything other than a complete lack of urgency.
The school will initially have space for 48 students, but will eventually open up to 120 students a year. Katie DeRosa, CBC News, Victoria.
Well, the Premier, meanwhile, wants to meet with the family of Tori Dunn. They've been very vocal in their calls recently for stricter bail laws in Canada, and it comes 3 weeks after their daughter was killed inside her home. David Eby now says federal bail reforms passed by the Trudeau government this year were supposed to make it more difficult for repeat and violent offenders to be released on bail.
We were successful in getting those rules changed, and they should have prevented this from happening to the Dunn family, and they didn't.
30-year-old Tori Dunn was attacked inside her own home in Surrey on June 16th. She later died in the hospital. A man has been charged with second-degree murder. Turns out he has a lengthy criminal past and had been on probation for previous convictions. He was already facing a charge of aggravated assault for an alleged stabbing that happened 3 weeks before Dunn was killed. WorkSafe BC says more than $2 billion in time loss claims were filed in the last 5 years for musculoskeletal injuries. Those are things like sprains, strains, inflammation, and disorders like tendinitis and carpal tunnel syndrome.
The number is high, and we've been tracking this for many years. Over the last 5 years, MSIs, we know, are the most common workplace injury, accounting for about 30% of all WorkSafe BC time loss claims and 26% of claims costs.
These injuries often come about from lifting objects or repetitive motions. They are common across many injuries, but most often seen in workers in the healthcare, retail, and local government sectors. After an incredible and surprising run, Canada is playing Argentina as we speak in the Copa America semifinals. It's considered a sort of David versus Goliath matchup, but win or lose, still a monumental moment for Canadian soccer. With that, let's go live to our Michelle Gassoub, who's at London Pub in Vancouver. Fans have gathered there to watch. And Michelle, we understand not a great start for Canada. Second half has just started. What's the mood like there?
You know what? Argentina is up 2-0. They just scored in the past few moments, but the mood here is pretty jubilant. I think, as you said, Tanya, this was a moment that people did not necessarily expect to see, and this is probably, arguably, the biggest historic game for the Canadian men's team. They have a sense that they are living on borrowed time. They did not necessarily think that they would make it this far, and now this historic matchup, Canada up against the #1 team in the league in Argentina and playing against arguably the #1 player in the league with Messi. Now Canada, by comparison, ranked 48th, so they were going to be facing an uphill battle no matter what going into this game. That being said, I think fans are excited about the prospect of even this matchup happening. Take a listen to people who gathered here earlier today to start watching.
This is a huge test, but this is amazing for Canada to have an opportunity like this to get this far in this tournament. So we're all really excited and hoping for a great result.
Now, they faced Argentina just over a week ago, and they did lose 2-0, but the Canadian coach has talked to Tanya about not necessarily trying to outplay this team, but to outrun this team, outlast this team with their athleticism. So we'll see if they're able to make some plays later in the game. As you can hear, very loud, a lot of excitement here, Tanya.
All right, thanks for that. That's our Michelle Gassou watching the Canada-Argentina matchup semifinals in Vancouver. Thank you. Still ahead, why Australia is giving the green light to Chinese EVs while North America and Europe are trying to pump the brakes on those Chinese imports. We'll talk to a journalist in Australia about the allure of cheap vehicles next. Stay with us. Welcome back. If you've been thinking of going green in terms of what you drive, it will cost you. We know that electric vehicles are typically pricier than traditional cars, but there is a change perhaps on the horizon with China producing far cheaper electric vehicles. It's actually had a big impact in Australia, where new Chinese EVs have made some serious inroads. Take a look.
Awadesh Prashad is taking his new electric vehicle for a spin through Canberra's leafy streets. He didn't think he could afford an EV, but after months of research, realised the Chinese brand BYD was within reach.
Tesla was overly priced in my view. There is not much difference. So that's the reason I landed on this one.
Here in Canada, meanwhile, as well as the United States, the potential arrival of electric vehicles from China is seen as a major threat, with talks of imposing tariffs and the fear that China will subsidize domestic car makers and then flood the international market. But as we've seen, Australia has forged ahead anyway. And joining us now to talk more about this is Logan Bennett, a journalist with the Australia Broadcasting Corporation, speaking with us all the way from Melbourne today. Thanks for making time for us, Logan.
Wonderful to be here.
So first of all, why has China allowed these Chinese, why has Australia allowed these Chinese EVs instead of trying to block them like we've been hearing about elsewhere in the West?
Well, I guess one of the biggest reasons is Australia doesn't really have a massive car industry to protect. For decades, we had Holden, the classic true blue Australian car brand. At its peak, there was about 500,000 sales of Australian cars in the 70s. But in 2017, the last of the manufacturers packed up. So now we're really relying on imported vehicles. And China is really forging ahead when it comes to cheap electronic vehicles, and heaps of them are launching in our country.
Let's backtrack a little bit for some context around these two countries. Australia and China had a bit of a trade war during the pandemic. So how have they arrived in this place now?
Well, during the pandemic, Australia its love-hate relationship with China, which is part of the reason that we have that love-hate relationship, is because Australia really relies on China for exports. It's our biggest trading partner, but there's all these political issues and tensions that simmer away in the background. Things like concerns about territorial ambitions in the South China Sea, 5G technology from China. And this all really came to a head during the pandemic when there were calls for an inquiry into the outbreak of COVID-19. And shortly after that, we saw China put a range of tariffs and trade barriers on a bunch of Australian goods like wine, barley and timber. And that really hurt a lot of Australian producers who want to get into that Chinese market. But since the change of government in 2022, there's been an opportunity to, reset relationships between Australia and China. So we're seeing some of those trade barriers and tariffs come off, and a bit more of a willingness and openness to work together. And following on from that, we've seen Chinese car manufacturers really look at Australia as quite a lucrative market. It has a really big, passionate car-loving population. It's got great road infrastructure, and it's a good launching pad for other Western markets.
Okay, so that's kind of the politics of it. Let's take it to the streets, I suppose. What's been the response from Australians? Are these Chinese EVs popular there?
Well, Australians are notoriously early adopters of new technology, and we're really familiar with driving Chinese cars. You know, Japanese brands like Toyota have really dominated our roads for decades. And now that we have all these big Chinese brands coming in, like BYD, Zeekr, GAC coming in, Australians are looking at them and saying, well, maybe it's worth a go. The other big thing to remember is Australia has such a huge multicultural population and a big Asian expat community. So a lot of Chinese migrants might have friends and family who own these vehicles back at home, and when they launch in Australia, they want to give it a go as well. But at the same time, there's been this long-running culture war about electric vehicles in Australia. The former Prime Minister famously said in 2019 that a plan to boost sales to 50% of new vehicle sales by 2030 would end the weekend because these electric vehicles couldn't tow boats or take Australians on these big outback camping trips that we love so much. But some of these Chinese new competitors coming in are offering these very cheap SUV cars that have hundreds of kilometres of range. So Australians are really voting with their feet.
Fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's Logan Bennett, a journalist with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, joining us from Melbourne. Up next, some First Nations are hailing a new deal to improve child welfare in Canada, but some advocates are calling for more transparency. We'll find out why after the break. Welcome back. For decades, the federal government ran a program that encouraged the removal of First Nations children from their homes and their families. Well, now the Assembly of First Nations says it has received an offer from Ottawa to reform the child welfare system for good. But as Olivia Stefanovich reports, the details of the offer are not yet public.
The new national chief arrived at her first National Assembly, ready to show the work she's doing to reform the First Nations child welfare system.
It's been a busy few weeks, and yesterday we received a draft offer from the Government of Canada on this issue.
That offer shrouded in secrecy. Cindy Woodhouse-Nebanak says she's received a dollar figure, but can't reveal what it is.
And while this offer is under settlement privilege, I can tell you today it's a very significant offer.
The federal government previously committed more than $40 billion for First Nations child welfare. over $20 billion to compensate First Nations children and families, and the other $20 billion to reform the system long term.
Canada has a duty to consult with First Nations about their children. It ought to be disclosing all this stuff.
First Nations child advocate Cindy Blackstock has done her own calculations. She says the government will need to spend more than $50 billion over the decade just to make sure First Nations child and family services are funded at the level of non-First Nations services.
If this is a deal where there is not enough money again to be able to stop this discrimination and prevent it from happening again, then leadership needs to know that when they make their decision. And Canada cannot be blackmailing chiefs by saying, you either take this deal or you get nothing.
The Crown Indigenous Relations Minister defended his government's decision to keep its offer under wraps.
Suffice to say that I think we're, as a government, very committed to resolving this issue once and for all and ensuring that there's fairness.
The AFN ended meetings early today to hold discussions behind closed doors about child welfare reform. The AFN says it's planning a separate meeting for chiefs to discuss and vote on the proposed deal. A special assembly is being organized to take place in Winnipeg this fall. Olivia Stefanovic, CBC News, Montreal.
The drug crisis in Canada has taken thousands of lives, and there's another consequence as well. Children being left without parents. That means it's often grandparents who are called upon to raise them. The CBC's Janani Whitfield has the story of one grandmother who's stepping up to help, all while dealing with her own trauma at the same time.
It's a pretty typical night in Faye Robinson's home.
Natalie, Nira, this is for you.
The 50-year-old grandmother serves up dinner like an army cook. She's helping to raise 14 grandchildren.
I started out with these 3 and this one. And then one granddaughter at 5. Next thing you know, bang, ended up getting 3 more. Well, actually 4 more. I ended up getting 3 more. And then bang, another 4 more.
Robinson has stepped up to care for her grandchildren.
Is Michaela gonna eat, my girl?
Because her 5 adult children have all struggled with drug addiction. Last year, 2 of her sons died. One from heart complications brought on by drug abuse. The other was shot and killed. 2 of Robinson's adult daughters have moved home with their children.
Hey! Hey!
It's a long-standing tradition in Indigenous culture for grandparents to adopt or care for grandchildren. But
the stress is, it's not the same situation as it was 25 years ago.
This First Nations social worker says crystal meth and fentanyl are consuming a generation of parents and putting this older generation under considerable strain.
It's much harder for those grandparents to be taking care of their grandchildren and also have to then be there to support a child who is addicted to crystal meth or fentanyl or whatever drugs.
Happy birthday to you.
Robinson is dealing with her own childhood trauma and now the grief from losing 2 sons. She says many grandparents struggle to care for their grandchildren in the midst of so much pain.
But they do the best they can. And that's the same thing with us. We do the same thing, try to do the best we can to move on with our lives, and we know that they need us, the grandchildren need us. Over here.
And she hopes her love keeps those grandkids safe and gives them hope for a better future.
You're not getting another cake, no.
Janani Whitfield, CBC News, Saskatoon.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is coming face to face with world leaders who are pressuring Ottawa to meet its NATO requirements. And depending on who wins the U.S. presidential election, it could turn into an even bigger problem for our country. The CBC's Evan Dyer is in Washington with more.
As Britain's new Prime Minister headed off to Washington for the NATO summit, he pledged unity and more defence spending.
This NATO summit is an opportunity for allies to stand together, to strengthen their resolve. I'm committed to that 2.5.
2.5% of GDP on defence. That's above the NATO threshold of 2%. Britain, like most of NATO, has been spending more lately and plans to go even further. Canada spent more too, but is still well short of the 2% benchmark. It's now one of only 9 countries that missed the mark, with no plan to get there by the end of the decade. The Trudeau government says it's had to rebuild from record low defence spending under the previous Conservative government.
Under Stephen Harper's Conservatives, Canada's defence spending fell to less than 1%, to 0.9% of GDP.
But that argument doesn't carry much weight on Capitol Hill, where a bipartisan group of U.S. senators recently wrote to Justin Trudeau expressing profound disappointment at Canada's progress.
This morning, looking forward to a great meeting with this distinguished group of senators.
Trudeau met with Senate leaders to try to persuade them that Canada is on the right track. But the pressure on Canada could dramatically increase if Donald Trump is re-elected.
We do need to see more disincentives, and I think it'll be important for Canada to understand that. I think those
Elbridge Colby served in the last Trump administration, and he's been floated as a potential national security advisor if Trump returns. He says he'd like to see trade actions against Canada and possibly try to boot Canada from the G7.
What kind of signal does it send for Canada to be in the G7 when it essentially mocks the bare minimum of what's required?
Those kinds of threats are unprecedented, and Canadian officials know that what is now really gentle chiding by the Biden administration could turn into a no-holds-barred high-pressure campaign if the Democrats lose in November. Evan Dyer, CBC News, Washington.
Meanwhile, an under pressure but defiant U.S. President Joe Biden delivered the opening address at that NATO summit in D.C. tonight amid doubts and debates over his candidacy. Our Paul Hunter has more on a party divided and its push to change the agenda.
With his political future in the balance when Joe Biden walked out on stage at the NATO summit in Washington, a key headline afterward, he didn't lose his train of thought.
Good evening.
Yes, scripted remarks, and yes, with teleprompters. Earlier, Biden's abilities even put to Justin Trudeau.
Mr. Prime Minister, do you have any concerns about Biden's age or mental acuity?
Good to see everyone here this morning. Ever since his stumbling performance at that debate with former President Donald Trump, Biden's fitness for office has been the issue in the contest for the White House. Now, a seventh Democratic lawmaker is publicly calling for Biden to end his campaign in a statement saying, "I'm asking that he declare that he won't run."
Do you have concerns about the president? Joe Biden is the nominee.
All day in the U.S. Capitol, Democrats met to talk about Biden's mental acuity. Many still stand with him.
We are riding with Biden.
Was there conversation about Vice President
We are riding with Biden.
But there remain the others.
He just has to step down because he can't win.
The debate cannot be unseen.
Highlighting their fear if Biden stays in, Donald Trump wins in November.
He shouldn't leave a legacy that endangers us, that we surrender to a tyrant.
And yet, as Biden emphasizes he's not leaving, for other Democrats, a realization all this infighting is costing them already. Now, signaling if he's staying, they've got to reframe those headlines.
Talk about the importance of preventing Donald Trump from ever setting foot in the White House.
It's because Donald Trump is dangerous. He is a convicted felon, an adjudicated sex predator, a wannabe dictator.
That was the CBC's Paul Hunter reporting from Washington. Well, Russia and its war on Ukraine will be high on the NATO agenda there this week. But at the same time, Moscow is hosting its own meeting between the leaders of Russia and India. The CBC's Briar Stewart has more on what those discussions are about.
Russia's president escorted India's prime minister around his residence during Narendra Modi's first visit to the country since 2019. It's a great pleasure to visit a friend at his home, Modi proclaimed. But you could argue the pleasure was Vladimir Putin's, given that Modi's visit comes as the NATO summit gets underway and shows that some world leaders are more than happy to do business with Moscow still.
It's a message that India holds on to strategic autonomy. It's trying to go ahead with its balancing act in relationship with different powers.
Modi met with Ukraine's president last month, but India has taken a neutral stance on Russia's invasion. Modi hasn't explicitly condemned it, but made these pointed remarks during his visit. The sight of innocent children dying shatters your heart, and this pain is extremely horrific, he said. His comments come as Kyiv marks a day of mourning after a barrage of missiles hit the capital yesterday, including this children's hospital. Officials say Ukraine was discussed during the visit and that Moscow promised to release Indian nationals who were misled into signing up for the Russian military.
There are a lot of Indians joining Russian army without their knowledge.
Mohammed Imran told CBC News that his 30-year-old brother, Mohammed Asfan, traveled to Moscow after a recruiter promised him a security job. A few weeks later, he was sent to Ukraine.
Everywhere we try our best to find him, but unfortunately we got his dead body.
His brother was killed in January, but it's believed at least a few dozen Indian nationals remain stuck fighting for Russia in Ukraine. Briar Stewart, CBC News, London.
Still to come, a new way to study climate change and how it plays into Canada's heat waves. What researchers have found out coming up next. Well, this heat wave is blanketing much of Western Canada, and while Environment Canada advises to drink plenty of water, stay in the shade, and pay attention to signs of heat-related illnesses, Albertans are also looking for ways to stay cool during this hot spell. The CBC's Travis McEwen is in Edmonton getting some tips and advice.
As I record this, it's around 31 degrees above zero, and I can feel myself sweating right now. And one way to cool off is to drink some cold water. Now, this is considered extreme heat for Edmonton, so let's check in with some Edmontonians to see how they cool off in this heat.
Popsicles, Slurpees, just trying to stay as cool as we can.
And pools.
And trying to get the pools.
Probably stay in clothes that won't make me feel hot, and keep drinking like ice cold water. Those just keep me cool.
I love being active outside even when it's hot. So biking, being on the lake. Even if it's 30 degrees, I still love to sweat.
You don't need to cool down?
No, no, honestly no.
And you can also get a nice cold water bottle and dump it all off your head.
What are the core principles for keeping yourself cool in extreme heat like this?
So one is evaporation. And so sweating is actually a good thing. So making sure that you're wearing looser clothing to allow your skin to sweat. And that basically allows your skin to produce heat and then evaporate that sweat off, and that ends up actually cooling your body. Another way you can kind of stimulate that evaporative cooling is by misting the skin with water, or even using a cool, damp compress on your skin as well, because that then allows the body to use that heat energy to evaporate the water off the body and has a similar effect. One common misconception and a lot of things that people like to do when they're out in the sun and having a good time is to have a beverage, in particular an alcoholic beverage. That is something that we typically don't recommend during heat waves because it actually can be counterproductive for dissipating heat from the body. So it can actually dehydrate the body by making you pee more, and can also kind of make you make poorer decisions when you're out and about in the heat, and can actually end up having worsening heat exposure.
A lot of these cooling off techniques that people use have to deal with discomfort from the heat. But what you really want to avoid is dehydration and sunstroke, which could save you a trip to the emergency room. Travis McEwen, CBC News, Edmonton.
New government research looks at how climate change influenced a recent heat wave in Quebec, Ontario, and Atlantic Canada. It's the first time Ottawa has done this kind of quick turn analysis. And as the CBC's Anand Ram explains, it's an effort to keep climate change top of mind during extreme heat events.
In BC's lower mainland, the air is thick, a heat dome trapping smog and spiking temperatures, pushing people to find ways to cool down.
Ice water.
Can you say it a little louder, buddy?
Say, eat ice cream.
Eat ice cream.
As almost everyone across the West finds ways to beat the heat, new research by Environment and Climate Change Canada is revealing how much influence climate change had on a mid-June heat wave in Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic Canada, pushing temperatures in some areas into the upper 30s.
Our finding was that an event like this was made at least 2 to 10 times more likely by human-caused climate change.
Experts say the new rapid research reinforces how burning fossil fuels over decades has powered extreme heat and drives home the need to build defenses.
You have to have infrastructure that can deal with these levels of heat, which before you might have said, okay, it's such a rare case that we don't really need to include that in our risk planning.
It's never this bad. We've never experienced anything in the 40s in Vancouver.
Research following BC's heat dome in 2021 that killed hundreds found climate change could eventually make extreme events like it far more frequent.
These changes are not random circumstance. These changes are because of a well understood scientific phenomenon that is going to continue to impact our lives.
And as relief comes to Canadians out west by midweek, Environment Canada says it expects to study just how much climate change influenced this heat wave as well. Anand Ram, CBC News, Toronto.
South of the border, unrelenting, oppressive heat continues across much of the U.S. Temperature records have been smashed and health warnings are widespread. Sweltering heat is stretching from the deserts of the southwest to Florida and as far north as Oregon. Portland has rolled out mobile cooling centers. Several deaths have been blamed on temperatures climbing into the 50s. And there, too, the threat of wildfires is increasing in the west. On the eastern seaboard, the hot weather is causing problems in New York as well. The extreme heat caused this metal bridge to expand, so it couldn't close properly. Fire crews spent hours dumping water on it to try to cool it down. Let's bring in our Darius Madavi with this latest on the forecast. Darius, I know we kept saying it was kind of indefinite, the end to this, and I know it technically might cool off, but not as much as we thought.
Yes, yeah, that is the case, especially here in southern BC. You may hear that the heat wave is ending or tapering off, but it's still going to be extremely hot in the interior. Here here on the coast, we may see heat warnings start to drop tonight and into tomorrow, but still temperatures will be quite high inland, feeling like the low 30s probably, even for the next few days because of that humidity. And again, over in the States, some areas over 50 degrees Celsius. I just wanted to highlight that. Parts of California and the surrounding states there, just a lot of extreme heat happening across the board. But don't forget, here in BC, especially in the interior, we're seeing a lot of that too. And again, this ridge of high pressure, even though it is starting to move out of the way and maybe break down a little bit, we're still going to see its influence in the south for quite a while. You'll see no real chance for that low pressure system moving across the northern parts of the province to make its way down here to the south as well. So even as a cold front races across the north, bringing their own set of problems, we are not going to have sort of the same effect of that. Because again, precipitation coming up to the northwest, but a cold front breaking across, meaning unstable conditions, the chance for storms, the chance for these high winds, plenty of activity still to come, especially up in the northern parts of the province. Our highs are going to remain quite high, as I mentioned, in the interior, still easily into the high 30s, mid 30s maybe by the end of this week, by Thursday and Friday, but that's still very hot, and so it's still a dangerous amount of heat. It's a little bit less unusual. The seasonal temperatures for places like Kamloops right now are around 28 degrees, but still 36 is quite a lot hotter than that, so be aware. Now, in terms of I wanted to focus on this for a second. Climate shift index. This tells you how much more likely temperatures are because of climate change, and you'll notice across the province, a lot of our temperatures are quite a lot more likely because of climate change. Just wanted to highlight that really quickly to show, this isn't entirely natural. It's made more likely we're going to see more of these heat waves. Now, in terms of conditions across the province, plenty of sunshine still, but a chance of rain in a few places, as well as that chance of storms in the northwest and in the southeast. And here in Vancouver, no chance of storms, still almost entirely sunny, but temperatures do start to moderate at least a little bit, Tanya.
Nothing but sunshine. Okay, thanks so much, Darius.
Thank you.
To the latest on that data breach at Ticketmaster now. The CBC's Vanessa Lee looks at the impact it could have on potentially hundreds of millions of customers who bought tickets earlier this year.
It's a cruel start to the summer for many Ticketmaster customers who bought tickets to events in North America.
We just think we just got one, yeah.
It wasn't hard to find Canadians who got the email telling them their personal information could be at risk.
Oh, definitely not happy with it. Wondering if there's a way it could have been prevented, for sure.
The ticket seller says between April 2nd and May 18th, an unauthorized user gained access to a cloud database hosted by a third-party provider, obtaining names, contact information, and credit card numbers.
This is a massive hack. We're talking about over potentially 500 million people whose information may have been compromised.
Weeks ago, a hacking group called Shiny Hunters claims it stole the personal information of more than 500 million Ticketmaster customers. Ticketmaster has not confirmed a connection.
This isn't your run-of-the-mill hacking organization. This is an organization that's highly coordinated and has sophisticated tools.
While Ticketmaster says it's investigating with help from outside experts and contacted U.S. law enforcement, consumers are encouraged to take their own actions.
Monitor your credit reports to make sure that your no credit applications have been taken out in your name. You want to be vigilant.
We are writing to notify you of a...
Customers like Roz Forbes are angry and considering legal action. She noticed fraudulent activity on her account at the end of April and now believes it's linked to this hack.
I had about $10,000 of weird charges on it that I didn't authorize. And I also got a bunch of weird emails that somebody was applying for car loans.
Ticketmaster is offering what it's calling identity monitoring free to its affected customers to look out for their personal data on the dark web, though some say that's just not enough. Vanessa Lee, CBC News, Montreal.
Up next, in search of your favorite local place to cool down with a dip, we hit the streets to find out the best secret spots of the summer. That's after the break.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
CBC returns as a media partner of the Surrey Fusion Festival, July 20th to the 21st. The festival features over 50 cultural pavilions that will incorporate the theme of landmarks of the world into their displays. For more information, visit surreyfusionfestival.ca. And never miss a special programming series, event, or contest. Subscribe to CBC Vancouver's e-newsletter and keep connected with us.
With temperature records breaking across the province and here on the south coast, many are seeking refuge in their favorite outdoor summer spots. But popular beaches are becoming crowded and parking spaces are harder and harder to find.
Fortunately, some locals say there are still some lesser-known gems worth exploring this summer, but are they willing to share their secrets? Let's find out.
I have a favorite place on Galiano Island, which is Montague Harbor. There's a walk-in campsite where you are right next to the water, and it's like heaven.
We like to go to the water parks close by. There's a Norquay Park is close by, and we go there with the kids when they were little, and even now still. It's local, it's fantastic. It's a great spot.
It's near the second level bridge. Underneath there's a New Brighton Park. That is a really quiet and nice park. Yeah, we like to go to the Vancouver Island too. Yeah, it's more quiet. Now I find I'm very busy in here.
I love coming to this place, honestly. It's great, especially the Spanish Bank. It's kind of laid back. People you would find with RVs, with families hanging out. They are not quite as busy on the Kitsilano Beach or the English Bay Beach, so it's a little more laid back that way. You know, the back side of Stanley Park, when you don't quite walk quite as much that side. It's more like a biking trail. That part is quite serene. It's very unique. It's more rocky on one side, and there is the Lionsgate Bridge running through, and you have the vast openness of the ocean.
Well, I don't know if I'd share the secret spots because that's what keeps them secret, right? It is hard to find spots that are quieter, don't have as many people in it. You can kind of get away from the city. I think there are spots in Trout Lake, certainly, that it's so big that you do get chances to kind of feel like you're the only people here.
It's true, there are spots if you know where to find them. Leave it at that.
Okay, we'll talk after the show. Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, our free app, as well as on YouTube and our website, cbc.ca/BC.
Michelle Gassou will have your next local news at 11 o'clock right here after the National. Have a good night.